I think I was lucky that there were the right teachers and mentors who helped me on my path. And if not for those people, I would be dead or in prison. I don't think I'm special so much as I've had these special people who have made a difference in my life. And I felt like that was a story worth sharing.
We already know what helps. Connection is the cure. It's our deep and meaningful relationships that give us hope and healing. Welcome to This Helps. I'm Marlon Morgan. Join us as we practice authentic and vulnerable conversations that inspire us to go deeper with the people in our own lives. Today, we sit down for a very special conversation with John B. King Jr., former Secretary of Education under President Barack Obama, and the author of the new book, Teacher by Teacher. His story isn't just about policy, it's about people. It's about the teachers who saw him and the systems that failed him. And it's about how deep and authentic relationships can change and even save a life. John, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Your book was incredible. The last time we talked was in 2019, and you keynoted a conference for us. And I was so excited that I walked to your hotel room in Sacramento at the Hyatt and tried to carry your bags. But the story that I tell people, you weren't having it. You wouldn't even let me do that. So that actually, the little bit that I know and the hour that I got to spend with you on stage that day and the keynote that moved everyone in the room, which was a big room, all of those things, I sort of kept going back to that experience as an anchor as I read through your new book. And it is an incredible book. It's one of my favorite books currently. So
thank you.
Thank you. And I knew too, I had always heard your story in sort of sound bites, and it was always, heroic and a story of loss, but then of things that you've gained and along the way, and sort of, making it to the top level possible in your field and sort of staying there in terms of influence as well. But putting names and dates and intimate details and foods and artists, musical artists, individual mentors, all of those things in the book made it a book about policy and hope in education and how to create systems that provide that hope. But it also was more intimate and funny than I was expecting.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
Can you tell us a little bit about just where you're at now and the things that you're doing before we get into the book?
Sure. So I have the privilege now of being the Chancellor of the State University of New York. 64 campuses in every corner of New York State. We serve about 370,000 students in degree programs, about 1.3 million students in all of our programs across each year. And it's super fun. We're doing exactly the things public higher ed was meant to do. Providing a path to opportunity for so many New Yorkers. So that's been very fun. And it's also great to be home in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn, and so it's nice to be back in New York.
Wonderful. So when did you start this book?
It's been now more than 5 years. It's before COVID. And really what sparked working on the book was this story that was published in the Washington Post about my family history and the discovery that our family made of the place where my great-grandfather had been enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
And, when we found where that was located, that really sparked a journey of discovery, including getting to know the family who are direct line descendants of the family that enslaved our family.
That's the Beckers, is that right?
The Beckers, exactly.
Yeah.
And we really built this fascinating relationship, complicated. We share a complicated history. We've learned a lot from each other. And the Washington Post told that story and, of course, came to the property which they still own, where the cabin where my great grandfather was enslaved is still standing. Um, and the story also traced some of my family's history and over the generations. And it got a lot of attention at the time.
Mhm.
And a book agent reached out to um, the reporter who'd written the story and said, do you want to turn this into a book? And he was working on another book project at the time, and he said, no, but you should really talk to John. He might be interested in doing a book. And writing a book is something that people will say to you sometimes, right? Oh, you should write a book. But I had never gotten that far in my thought process around it till I got this outreach, and then I thought, maybe I really should try to put some of these stories from my life and career into a book. And that's what began the process. And I've had busy career and busy family life, and so this fits and starts. But I'm really glad to be at this point of having the book ready to come out.
So it took, 5 or so years to kind of get from that point of the article that was published and then to get to the point where you're like, no, I feel good about this because I don't know you super well, but this book, each line is thought out, it's artful. I expected more policy
Mm.
than intimacy.
Hmm.
How did you find that balance?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are a lot of education policy books, and I felt like the thing I hope to contribute is more sharing my own journey and the amazing teachers I've gotten to work with. Sometimes when I share my story and kind of walk people through the challenges I face, I think people have that tendency sometimes to make it about me,
Hmm.
and I always have resisted that because
Hmm.
I think I was lucky that there were the right teachers and mentors who helped me on my path. And if not for those people, I would be uh, dead or in prison. Like, just to be clear, like I don't think I'm special so much as I've had these special people who have made a difference in my life, and I felt like that was a story worth sharing because there are so many narratives in American life that are sort of like, oh, that person pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and there's sort of like these hero myths, as opposed to the real story, which is the difference that educators can make in people's lives. To me, that's the story I really wanted to try to capture with this book, that teachers and mentors can be the difference for young people. And I've been the beneficiary of that. And I hope when people read the book, it will inspire them to try to be that person in someone's life. I hope if young people read the book, that will give them a sense of hope about their future, even if their current situation is incredibly difficult. If they can find that teacher or mentor who can be that source of support for them. And I hope it will raise questions for all of us about how do we better support teachers and mentors and the people who are making that difference in people's lives.
Before we get any further about this incredible book, and I draw some parallels even between the things I was thinking while reading it, I want to get the one question out of the way that I know people are going to be upset if I don't ask you, and that's about the current state of the U.S. Department of Education. Can you just give us your thoughts? You talk a lot about hope. I took a lot of hope from reading your book. What are we in for?
Look, it's a really distressing moment. If we think about what the department does, I would say there are sort of four buckets, right? One bucket of work for the department is getting resources to the most vulnerable students in K 12. Title I program that sends money to schools serving low-income students, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act funding, which provides services for students with disabilities, Title III funding for English learners. All of that could be in jeopardy. They've laid off many of the people who work in those areas. We haven't yet seen what their budget proposals will be, but if those dollars go away, we're talking about larger class sizes, teacher layoffs, um, fewer advanced placement classes, fewer school counselors. It would have a devastating impact. The second bucket of work is the Pell Grant program and the federal loan system. And this is what makes it possible for millions of Americans to access higher education. So if you take that away, you undermine not only the higher education sector, but the health of the American economy and the strength of American democracy.
From this point of view, we wouldn't be having this conversation today because I would have never been able to go to school without those programs.
This is the thing, exactly. So, again, they say, oh, it'll all be fine. But they've laid off the people who work in those areas. And we can't afford for that system to break, right? We saw some of this last year when the FAFSA had a number of technical challenges and really made the whole process of accessing financial aid more difficult. If that happens this year with so many fewer people, I worry if things break, will we be able to recover? Will we be able to get students on track to college? And for first gen students, for low income students, if the federal financial aid system becomes an obstacle rather than a help, they'll get discouraged. And so I'm very worried about that. The third bucket of work is civil rights enforcement. I always point out to people, if you think back to that painting of Ruby Bridges, the Norman Rockwell painting,
Mhm.
you know, Ruby Bridges is in the center, but who you see around her are federal marshals because the state of Louisiana, the New Orleans schools didn't want to serve her, did not want to give her equitable access to opportunity. It was the US federal government that had to intervene. And, last year, the department got more than 20,000 complaints through the Office for Civil Rights, many of those from parents of kids with disabilities who weren't getting the services they're entitled to under the law. So I'm very worried about civil rights enforcement and fearful of what losing that civil rights enforcement will mean for the nation's schools. And then the fourth bucket of work, and this is one that's less visible maybe, but it's data, transparency, research. Why is that so important? Well, partly because it helps us know where things are going well and where we're struggling, partly because it provides accountability. When I was in the department, we used data on student outcomes to crack down on predatory for-profit colleges that were stealing students' Pell Grant money and GI Bill money. Well, in an environment where there's no information, no data, that's where people can get taken advantage of. So I'm very worried about all four of those areas, uh, and I'm heartbroken that we're in this moment where people are essentially arguing that education shouldn't be a national imperative. And that to me is just so counter to how I understand what is in the interests of our economy, our democracy, our national security.
Even as a school counselor early on, that was my first job. Often I would have students that were, at that time, they were students who were at risk. I think now I've heard at promise and a number of other more helpful, ways to delineate. But I think one thing that I often heard and felt very strongly about is they would say a name of one of these universities, and they'd say, this is right by my neighborhood. They said it's free to go there because I can get these loans or get it paid for. And that was always one of the first things that I would check on, is kind of like, where are you headed after this year? What are the people who are the people you're reaching out to? That alone was such a trust breach, for education in general. But as you were
Hmm.
talking, I don't even want to. I don't even want to go here, but see, and it's the only time I think I will. But as you were talking, I was thinking about the names of those universities, and the current administration had started one. I think.
Well, that's right.
I'm sure that's something you've thought of already. I just thought about it.
It's just very dark. It's very dark.
Okay.
You know.
Well, I want people to understand, increase their understanding of what the U.S. Department of Education does. And one of my favorite presidents, Jimmy Carter, in I believe it's 1979, was the one who, sort of pushed it through to actually
That's
make
right.
it happen. And, it's so interesting to think of Jimmy Carter and, sadly his passing recently, but to think about he's someone that gives me hope. And
Hmm.
I would hope that that not all is lost there.
Yes. Yes. And you think about what a life well lived should look like.
Mm.
Not only the things he achieved in his public life as a governor and as president, but then what he achieved in his life post presidency to really wake up every day trying to figure out how you could make a positive difference in the world, from building houses to monitoring elections to doing human rights work. Just an extraordinary life.
He was one of the people that I still hold and in high regard, and look at like a leader and a president who took and lived by the set of ideas and ideals that he had put forth then, all the way to the end, like
That's right.
nearly 100 years later. You know,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
so thank you for letting us kind of go down that route. I want to spend the rest of the time talking about uh, you and the story and even how it affected me. I'll give you a brief history. My dad was half black. My grandfather was one of the first black judges in California. He was the first on the Superior Court in Sacramento, and had to be appointed because he wasn't going to get the job any other way. And so I got to grow up hearing a lot of stories from him and from that side of my family about what it actually took. And even to get to law school and to pay for it, he had to start a funeral home and do things that other people didn't really want to do. And very in the black community, for example, who didn't really trust white people at the time to handle their remains, because they didn't feel that they'd be respectful. So my grandfather actually started, the Morgan Jones Funeral Home to help the community, but also was able to have a sustainable business and then pay for to be the first African American at McGeorge Law School. So I'm so proud of him. But the way you describe your father and your relationship with your father, that you lived with him and had so many interactions, but you didn't feel like you truly knew him and had to read about
Mm-hmm.
him later.
Yeah. When even when I was little, my father was so much older. When I was born, my mom was 40, my dad was 66. And he was not very present in my early childhood. I mean, he lived in our house, but uh, we didn't play catch. We didn't have the kind of dynamic that uh, certainly I tried to have with my daughters. So he was sort of a removed figure in my early years. And then when my mom passed when I was 8, I described this in the book, I was so devastated by losing her
Mm.
and also so alone. And it, it, it was in many ways uh, so foreign to me to be just with my dad. It just wasn't
Mhm.
a familiar experience.
You kind of described her as the glue that kind of made it work.
She was. I mean, she was the school counselor in my elementary school when I was little. Uh, so we would go to school together every morning and come home every day together. She was the one who, made lemonade and set up the volleyball net in the backyard for the kids
Hmm.
to play. Like the 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 principal parent in my household, and she also managed my father's moods. He was moody, drank a lot, and she navigated all of that. And then I had my half brother, her son, my brother Gil, who was finishing high school and then going on to college, and she was supporting him and keeping him organized. And so, yeah, she was the glue. And losing her, uh, I mean, there's no words to describe the trauma of that.
Hmm.
And then my father had what I now know to have been Alzheimer's, but at the time I didn't know. He just was incredibly unpredictable and could be absolutely silent one night, yelling at me the next, violent even. And his condition deteriorated quite significantly over the period from when I was 8 to when I was 12. Um, so I never got to know him as who he was in his career. He was the first Black principal in Brooklyn. He was, at the end of his career, deputy, then called deputy superintendent, would now be called deputy chancellor of schools for the entire New York City. At the time, probably the highest ranking African American educator in the country.
Hmm.
He had all these people who he'd mentored and who thought of him as so pivotal to their career, all these Black educators across the city of New York. But all of that I learned later. I had no real connection to that when I was a kid, other than that, occasionally people would come by the house, especially when my mom was still alive. And it was clear that he was a big personality and people were very deferential to him, but I didn't have any sense of what his career had been about. And it's amazing, now I've ended up having a career that has a lot of parallels to my
Yeah.
father's career.
Yeah.
Uh, but not because of knowing about it, but for deeper, maybe
Yeah.
spiritual reasons.
Yeah. How did it happen? I mean, because you're talking about a very parallel career, but you're also coming from a place of, I think, proving it with the book, of being somewhat in touch with your emotions. You talk about making an actual decision in your relationship with your wife about when you wanted to actually just fully be present and the person that you were, without all these, I think you said, trap doors and kind of walls up. But like, that is so much different. It's almost like you took what your dad was trying to do and added, maybe on his shoulders, maybe not. I mean, because kind of what you're describing is not really. But yeah, how did that happen?
So for sure, one thing that was critical was I just had this amazing series of teachers who
Mhm.
gave me a sense of hope and purpose and created spaces where I felt safe and nurtured. I mean, obviously, my mom did that for me when I was very little. But then in that period, especially when I was with my dad, school became the one place in my life that was safe and supportive. I had a teacher, I'm still in touch with him,
Mr.
Alan
Osterwile?
Osterweil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How old is he?
He recently turned 80, and he's amazing. He's actually gone back to painting, which is something he did earlier in his life. And he's been really prolific in terms of the amount of paintings he's done. I went to his art show not too long ago.
So now you're supporting
Uh,
him.
yeah, he's,
He
he's, he's incredible.
yeah.
And, in his classroom, we read the New York Times every day. We went on all these field trips, the Museum of Natural History, the cloisters, the ballet. We did theater productions, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare in elementary school, which can be very intimidating, that vocabulary, but
I still
it was
feel that
also very
it's
empowering.
intimidating as a 44-year-old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but to be able to use those words, and he would help us understand what they meant. And we did a production of Alice in Wonderland. It just was a magical place. And, he didn't have a sense of how difficult things were for me at home. But he, as a teacher, created a space where I could be a kid when I was not able to be a kid outside of school. And that was an incredible blessing. Uh, and, as I describe in the book, I was very fortunate, even as I uh, struggled with things at home, to have teachers, a series of teachers, who just kept creating a space that was um, nurturing. And so when I became an educator, for me, that was a really important role that I wanted school to play. Of course, academically engaging and rigorous and challenging, but also um, emotionally safe and supportive. And that can be a hard balance to strike, but that's what I've worked to do throughout my career.
It's interesting because you describe your relationship with Mr. Osterwell and a few other teachers and mentors, but it's not like I think what teachers often think about and sometimes are burdened by is to think they have to sit with every student who is having a hard time, learn about their home life, know everything going on, and sort of be their therapist. But from what you're saying, it sounds like that really wasn't what inspired you.
That's right. I mean, I think about when I was in seventh grade. I had this teacher I talk about in the book, Miss D. She's my seventh grade social studies teacher. I don't think I ever talked to her, not that I can recall, about my home life in any way. But her class was my saving grace. My father was so sick. At that point, I was, figuring out how to get food in our house. I was keeping our household going. My father was so unpredictable at that point. I just sat often in class worrying about, was he okay?
Mhm.
Were we going to be okay? Was it ever going to get better? But in Miss D's class, I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about what we were learning in social studies and about the Aztecs. And, I describe in the book this project we did, an Aztec newscast, and I was the
Mhm.
Aztec sportscaster. And I remember it so well because I was so motivated to do a great job on that project because Misty was this engaging, funny, charismatic actress teacher who made me love social studies and love being in school. And uh, that's a gift that teachers can give, creating that space of joyful learning.
To a teacher who is watching the news every day and feeling sad and feeling maybe almost a bit hopeless or like their job is not being exalted to where it should be or the respect, because that would be hard. Even the most humble people I know, everyone wants to be recognized and celebrated for the hard work they do. And teaching is an incredibly hard job, as you also wrote about. What would you tell a teacher right now who is thinking, I kind of the lights out, I need to get it back. These kids still rely on me.
Yeah, I guess a couple things. One, I'd say thank you because I don't think we do enough of that. Just telling educators how much we appreciate what they do every day and how hard it is. And then two, I would just encourage folks to uh, recognize that you may not know in the moment the impact you are having, but you're changing lives every day. I share in the book the story of my father's wake
Hmm.
when a man walked up to me who was probably in his 50s and said he'd seen my father's obituary. He'd been my father's student, and he decided to come to the wake because my father had meant so much to him as his teacher.
Mhm.
And I was, as a 12-year-old, just so blown away by that. Like that, he'd had such an impact years later that he wanted to be there just to say thank you to me, this 12-year-old, right?
In reading that, I thought, what an interesting time. Is that generational too? Painting the picture of today, like, would you ever see an obituary?
Right.
Would you
Right.
take the time to go? Would that be weird?
Right, right. It's such a different time, right? People don't get a hard copy of the newspaper where you flip through and see the obituaries. Right, so
Right.
true.
Also, who reads them? I mean, I actually am one of the few that still do get a hard
Mm-hmm.
copy because I'm so distractible with ads and things, and so it helps
Yeah,
me. But I could be honest with you, I'm skipping that page like
yeah,
purposely.
yeah. It was a different era, right?
Yeah.
But I was so glad, in retrospect, that he came and said that. It gave me such a clear window into who my father was in a way that I had not experienced as a kid. And I've had that experience again. I tell the story in the book of, I was building a network of schools in New York City, and sort of unbeknownst to me, we ended up buying a building that had been long abandoned that was actually the school where my father had been the first black principal in Brooklyn, PS 70.
That coincidence also blew my mind. I was like, I can't believe th- I had to go back and reread it. I'm like, this is the school? It was built in the 1800s.
I mean, it was incredible. And coincidence is even not strong enough a word.
It feels
Uh,
spiritual. I gotta say,
yes,
I don't like to over spiritualize things, but man, it seems like
yes.
there's someone in charge.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And then when we opened, so we renovated this building to create a school.
Hmm.
This is in Bedside, Brooklyn.
Hmm.
Uh, and when we renovated the school and we had the grand opening, people came who were my father's students when he was the principal there. They literally came with their class pictures because at that time the principal would come out and stand with each class on picture day. And so they brought me their class pictures with my father as their principal and talked about what he meant to them and to the community to be a black principal in Bedside, Brooklyn, as an example of what was possible. And I'm just grateful because again, I just didn't have a connection to that part of my father, and I so appreciate now more who he was.
That's incredible. And I'm really sorry that he was in the state he was in when you could have gotten to know him. I think that was really sad. But it is incredible to have the kind of life that sends out so many ripples that they sort of come back to your generations in the future and tell you. And I had a similar experience at my grandfather's funeral because, again, he would tell me anything I wanted to know about the judiciary,
Hmm.
or his time at Oxford, or just. But seldom could I get. I'd have to talk to my grandma to get any kind of emotional, like, did he ever I never saw him cry. He had a huge
Hmm.
scotch collection, so I think there were some similarities there. But reading and hearing your story also, my father, he was a drug addict and addicted to alcohol and passed away on the streets. And the last few times we visited him, it was at a sort of a halfway house, and sometimes not even that, just a house that was like a shelter, temporary shelter. And uh, and then my mom got sick right afterwards. So one thing that stuck out to me, and I thought she was going to die, and that was obviously, and it was around very similar ages. So as I was reading through your book, it was almost activating for me, but not in a bad way, just in a way of like I felt really seen and like I haven't had to deal with much in the way of racism or anything like that. Typically, people just assume I'm white, but everything else that you mentioned, kind of cooking some of your own meals and going and getting that food, which led me to wanting to see if you're up for this. Can we go through? I wanted to name some foods from your book. You write, I don't know, maybe there's 50 references to food, I would guess.
Mm, mm,
And there's also some references to shows. And those were the two things I had for comfort during that
mm-hmm,
time
mm-hmm.
as well. And so I'm wondering if you'd be open to, if I have a list here from my notes. If I say a food, can you tell us about it, the significance, and maybe even a person it was related to?
Sure, sure, sure.
Well, first, I want to start with Cinnamon Life cereal.
Mm, mm. Yeah, so growing up, as a little kid, that was my favorite cereal. I just love Cinnamon Life cereal. And I talk about in the book at this moment, maybe my first incident of racism and deep awareness of race, which was kids in my class, kindergarten, saying I was dirty
Mm,
because I of my skin because I'm black and Puerto Rican, and so I came home really upset about this. And my class was diverse, mostly white, um, but some kids of color. But I just was so hurt by my classmates uh, othering me in that way.
mhm.
Um, and so I came home and I told my mother this story. And I mean, so smart as maybe because she was an educator, she said to
Mhm.
me, uh, you shouldn't feel bad about your skin color. You're the color of cinnamon life.
Mhm.
And I was so excited to be the color of cinnamon life. It like lifted the the whatever the bad feelings were immediately. It was very, very effective on my mom's part.
What a reframe.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow. And it was something that you genuinely loved. You're like, there's no way this is bad. So if it's
exactly.
cinnamon, yeah, I loved that.
Exactly. Exactly. And it was important. And it's something I've thought about as a parent, right? Because there are messages that kids of color can take away from society and media about their self-worth and value. And it's important to pour into them a sense of their value. My mother did that very, 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 very subtly but effectively with the cinnamon life.
Wonderful. Well, there's a whole list here, and I want to just hang out. This is the most I've read. When I've read a book, I wanted to hang out with someone. So one thing that I would hope I would do if I wrote a book is devote at least one or two sentences to fun dip and describe
Hmm.
what that is. Can you describe that to us now?
I mean, Fun Dip, it's so gross in retrospect. I mean,
It is
it's
easy to
like,
judge now, but
right, right. At the time, I mean, so, we had a ice cream truck that used to come to our um like recess, basically. Like it would pull up right next to where we went outside to play in elementary school. Uh, and one of the things I always loved to get was Fun Dip, which is this. It's basically just a lot of sugar. It's a white sugar stick
hmm
in one of the pouches, and then it's
hmm
two neighboring pouches with
hmm
different colored sugar powder, and you lick the white sugar stick and you put it in the like grape powder
Yeah, was
and
it?
you
It barely tasted like different than the other one, though. I feel like it
really
was like
really is
different
pretty
color,
similar.
but yeah,
Exactly, it's all psychological. It's basically you just take a cup of sugar and you
yeah.
just eat it, but it was a delight. and it
Yeah.
was a delicacy of
Oh my gosh.
Canarsie, Brooklyn in the 80s.
Just remembering, I remember you had to be almost like a surgeon to get the top off of
Yes,
all of the packets. And then the other
yes,
thing, I don't know if you did this, but when I bought it, because it was like hard-earned money, I
yeah.
would check to see if that stick was broken. Because a lot of times they give it to you,
Oh
and that
yeah,
stick, you
yeah.
gotta like get your fingers all in
Oh,
there.
that's a mess if the stick is
Hmm.
broken. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And you would
Okay.
never you wouldn't want to give up any of it, you know? Like I can remember turning it upside down
Yeah.
and trying to
Oh,
get that
y-
last little few
absolutely.
drops of
You gotta
sugar.
tear it down. Keep tearing it down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Terrible, terrible.
Oh man. So okay. There's a couple other stories, and I think these will land. Sour Patch Kids. You mentioned
Mm,
Sour Patch Kids.
mm. Yeah, I think at least one of the references to Sour Patch Kids is when I was a teacher at a high school in Boston, my colleague who taught across the hall, we just were working so hard, and we'd be there after school, grading papers, tutoring kids, planning our lessons, and so. And we'd often be one of the only people there, a handful of people still in the school. And so we would take a break and go get Sour Patch Kids as part of the way to like keep
Hmm.
going. And again, in retrospect, these are very unhealthy patterns.
Well, we're not. This isn't judgmental, John. This is stuff that got us through. The thing that I think I'd be ashamed to tell you is every time I got to go to the store, it was cheese filled hot dogs, and like the cheap kind too, like that you could microwave. And
Wow.
so yeah, so I mean, not like Sour Patch Kids is nothing. I feel like. So, all right. And that sort of halfway maybe through the book, three quarters, you start to talk about your relationship, and it like the book becomes almost like a rom-com in a way. It's like so good. But you talked about sort of working side by side with her, the friend that said you were, destined to be, and actually she was right. But you also talked about barbecue sweet potato chips.
Yes, yes. So we had this ritual, Melissa and I. We'd go to church on Sunday, uh, and a wonderful Black Catholic church in Boston, very community focused. And Father Tom, who actually married Melissa and me, would give these great homilies. And so you'd be thinking about that and be such and great gospel singing. And you just leave church and you feel good. And then we would go to this like food co-op in Jamaica Plain in Boston, and we would get sandwiches and uh, barbecue sweet potato chips and lemonade,
Mm.
and we would go home and kind of lay out this this again, I'm not sure it's the healthiest, but this very comfort food kind of lunch, and we'd eat our lunch and often take a nap. And at that point, Melissa was commuting, or we were commuting back and forth. Like she would come up from New York to Boston a lot of weekends, um, and that was a part of our tradition that we kept it going once we were living together. And even now, we still occasionally will get that exact setup because it's reminiscent of that period.
Thank you for indulging that. I have one more. And just to be clear, nobody's listening to this podcast expecting any kind of a healthy reminder for it's this helps, but it's not really food. Our first episode was with Dr. Anna Lemke, and who wrote Dopamine Nation, and she counseled me the whole time about how to cut down on Haagen-Dazs. So we're good. This is one that not quite as happy, but also very meaningful. Arroz con pollo.
Yeah, yeah. So that's chicken and rice, and my grandmother would make that when I was a kid, and my grandmother played this really important role in my life when I was living with my father. Uh, she would often come visit for the weekend. They didn't really interact, but she would, take me to the movies, we'd go to church. She was just an incredibly caring and kind person, and also an amazingly uh, tough and gritty person too. Like
Hmm.
she moved to New York from Puerto Rico as a single mom with with two kids, my mom and my uncle, and they were very little, maybe 5 and 3 or something, and she moved on her own to the Bronx. She worked in a garment factory so that they could have opportunity. And my mom was the first in her family to go to college at Hunter in the CUNY system, and like my grandmother poured into her children the chance for them to have this really American dream. And they did. And she made that possible for them through her hard work. And, one very proud moment was, she came to my Harvard graduation. And I was really happy for her to have that because that is what she worked for.
She could see you take full advantage of her working in the garment factory and,
Yes.
an untold number of other things all day long. And that was a culmination for her, it sounds like.
Yes. Yes. Um, and so I loved going to her house, her apartment in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, and she would, make Puerto Rican food, and arroz con pollo was one of the last things that she made for me and Melissa when we went to see her not long before. Um, she passed just before our wedding, which was really hard because
Mhm.
I knew that was something she would really enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like it was tough to say goodbye, and you sort of almost knew that that was the time that you were going to see her last. And yeah, it was very moving to read about. But again, thank you for being vulnerable and putting these things in the book because, for example, if I had read this when I was younger, it would have been an incredible, or even just known some of these things that a person that had gone through some similar things that I was going through can make it to the place that you have and do as much good and have as much impact as you have. So um, it's just really inspiring. And I want students now to read it. I'm like, how can I get this out to maybe if, obviously if teachers read it, then students might be inclined. And so we can talk about that. But okay, I want to move from food. I have a few different references. First up, family ties. That one came up a few times. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, Family Ties was this show that was about a classic American family, I suppose. There were some things, it was a sitcom. I didn't have a normal family experience, right? Even when my mom was alive, but certainly living with my dad, I felt very different from normal families. And I was very envious of families that, where there were multiple kids and two parents and dinner on Sunday. And I could see in my neighborhood families that had this life that I envied, and TV was sort of a window into that. And Family Ties was that because it was this family of three kids and two parents, and the parents, one of the one part of the shtick of the show is that the two parents were so in love, and they would always be sort of canoodling or whatever
PDA,
what the
a lot
word
of
is.
PDA
Yeah,
from
yeah, yeah.
Mr. and Mrs. Keaton. Yeah. They were-
Exactly. And the kids were always so grossed out by it, horrified
yeah.
by it. But I always
Yeah.
thought it was so sweet that they had that relationship. I didn't have a model for that in my life. And then, of course,
Alex P. Keaton.
Alex P. Keaton, played by
Yep.
Michael J. Fox, was very conservative, and the rest of the parents were sort of hippie in their politics, but he was very conservative. He wore a tie all the time, and I did
Mhm.
have a period, especially in middle school, where I would wear a tie. Like I had a whole thing that I was channeling Alex P. Keaton. Obviously, my politics are very different from that now, but for a time,
Still, just for those who are listening, John is wearing a suit and tie.
yes, that is true.
For other reasons, but you answered my next question without me asking it. So, and because you call yourself probably playfully a nerd 2 or 3 times, and I'm like, what does he mean? Alex P. Keaton nerd? Is that what we're talking here?
I mean, I am. I own that.
Well, he owned it too. He was like he
Yes,
was kind of like uh I mean, he was the star of the show, really. He had put
yes.
together and super smart. But yeah. Okay. I'll do one more show and then one music artist.
Hmm.
And that is Different Strokes.
Yeah. So different strokes. Um, for folks who don't know, like the premise of the story was this sort of wealthy white father who adopts these two African American brothers,
Arnold and Willis. Is that
Arnold and Willis.
Phil Drummond's? Mr. Drummond's?
Phil Drummond, exactly, Mr. Drummond,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I watched a lot of TV because I didn't go outside as
Same.
much, especially as my father was more and more sick. I was sort of um, a lot of my kind of sense of the world came through watching TV. I would watch TV while I did my homework. I would watch TV, uh, often late into the evening. And
Mhm.
Different Strokes was a show I really enjoyed because it was about kids.
Yep.
Gary Coleman, who played Arnold, was the sort of the center of the show, and uh, the characters were all very amusing, and there were often little life lessons
Mhm.
in the stories that stick with you. I some of them I still reference today. Like they really stick with you. There was one episode it was about standardized testing, and it was the question that on the test was like how many people could sleep in a 3-bedroom apartment. And I don't remember exactly what Arnold's answer was, but it was a very high number because he was like, well, you'd have, you know, 3 people in the bed, and you'd have 2 people sleep on the floor, and you'd have, somebody could sleep in the bathroom, and you'd have somebody on the couch, and somebody could sleep under the under the kitchen table or the dining room table. Like he and the point the show was making was that the framing of the question was very much shaped by social capital, and you might have a very different answer based on your life experience. And the idea was that Arnold and Willis had a life experience of like folks, needing to fit a lot of folks into a small apartment. And that was very different, maybe, from the assumptions of the test writer.
It's the most relatable example I've ever heard about standardized testing, not being culturally appropriate for everyone.
Yeah. And so you really got to work to make sure that the questions are about what the student knows and not just a mirror about how society is organized. It's hard to do.
Also about that show, it was one of the only ones that wasn't like Family Ties to me, because you brought up Growing
Mm,
Pains, a few other ones, and even the Cosby Show I loved, but it's like, man, that wasn't, you know, I didn't know what a brownstone was, for one, and
right,
two,
right.
a doctor and a lawyer. I mean, did you guys maybe a little bit
Right,
overdoing
right,
it?
right.
Yeah. So I loved that that they kind of got to. You saw someone, going from a different culture into another one, and even the dad often learned lessons about
Yes,
that he needed to learn. So
that's
that
right.
was That was really cool. Well, okay, so I said the Cosby Show. I You did reference Lisa Bonet, but since we don't have
Mm.
time for it, we're gonna go Christopher Wallace.
Biggie Smalls. So,
Yeah, yeah.
look, there are just certain um, music figures who like define a period, and you think about the history of hip hop and what Biggie Smalls meant to hip hop, and I ended up at one point living probably like, I don't know, 3, 4 blocks, if that, 2 blocks from where he grew up, in the Clinton Hill section of Brooklyn. And, one of the things I love about Clinton Hill, Fort Greene, where I also now live, is just there is this incredible diversity and this African American cultural history, um, that's so important. And I still, when I'm in my car and I'm trying to find a space of peace, I will sometimes put on some Biggie Smalls and lower my windows and just turn up the volume and
Are you sharing this in any other interviews? Because I feel very special right now.
that's not something I've ever talked about in an interview. So yeah,
Oh, well, it is safe here. I'll
yeah,
do whether it's Ready to Die. I think like that song with Bone Thugs. I feel like that's like
yeah,
if you want to
yeah,
get in the
yeah,
zone
yeah,
to really
yeah,
tackle a
yeah.
big talk or something. But obviously, Life After Death. The double disc. I think for me was like beyond juicy and hypnotized. But uh, thank you for sharing that. And maybe off record, we can even talk more hip hop at some point. Well, I have a couple of things I wanted to wrap up with, and I really appreciate you going down that road that I think people are going to just find fun and relatable and getting to know you a little bit more. You had mentioned a couple of things I want to leave people with because these are things that helped me from what you wrote. You mentioned already at the beginning going sort of to that Edge Hill farm that was ended up only being, I don't know, 30 miles from your house or something, or was it?
Yeah, not even. Yeah. Yeah. Like 25 miles. Yeah.
Yeah, the history of enslaved people in your family, that's where they lived.
Hmm.
Like you got to go to and it wasn't a museum. And, in a kind of a weird, eerie way, it was the cabin, I think they call it the quarters, which, it sounds,
Hmm.
you had a few different opportunities with the family who lived there, the Beckers, to sort of increase their understanding. And I think it sounds like it was good for you too. But, they had sort of like weed killer and stuff like stored in there, but I think they ended up cleaning it up out of respect. And that whole story is just the reason I'm recapping is because I want people to know it's in there and it's towards the end. And it's like, it took my breath away. It was incredible. And I had my cousin Jan, who lives in Compton, did our whole history. So we have a similar. I even have
Mm.
a picture of a plantation owner who is the reason I'm here. So uh, through sort of a forced relationship there, and
Hmm.
and that's putting it very nicely. But
And look, this is what people are trying to erase, right?
hmm
This is the truth of our history. These ugly truths of our history is something folks are trying to erase, and I think we have to sit with them, right? We have to sit with the reality of what the institution of slavery was, of what Jim Crow was, of what happened to the Native Americans. Like, that's real, and it may be uncomfortable to talk about those realities. But I'm very worried that when you see states trying to say, like, we're just going to cover all that over, we're going to act like that didn't happen, because it did. It shapes our present. Uh, Sadly, there are echoes of some of the uglier parts of our history in our contemporary moment, and we have to grapple with that. And obviously, it was shocking to grapple with it so directly. As African American, you kind of there's that history in the background, but you don't expect to ever stand inside of the place where your great grandfather. There are kids right now who are being babysat by their great grandfather. Like, that's generationally not that far.
There's a few places that you visit and talk about and sort of bring up history throughout the book, and it just feels like that would be really helpful for folks who maybe understand that their point of view is not very open or well-rounded, and could
Hmm.
really to go to a place really brings things alive for people. And I think, I hear all the time from folks that if it's not my fault, I didn't do this, I don't. And you make the point, it's not like the people who live there now that they didn't have,
Hmm.
enslaved people. But if you don't know it and accept it and know it well enough to recognize it, you won't recognize if and when it's happening again.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's really hard to, it would be nice as the it can be really unforgiving, and horrible truths come up all the time. But, just accepting some leaves us so vulnerable to other people who still have, thoughts and ideas to recreate that.
That's right. That's exactly right.
You mentioned a little bit about when you had to and were going to put in some new policy, and we're holding some town halls. And something that helped me uh, understand that, and you have this incredible, I think people know by now, all the times I've, brought up politics at dinner essentially on this podcast, and all of your responses are so loving and so understanding. And I think that is the kind of leadership we need. And I'm so glad people are hearing that. You also said, when people are afraid, facts don't matter, relationships do. When you were sitting in the cabinet, in President Obama's cabinet, how did you reconcile situations that called for that truth, but also
Mm,
stay connected to your childhood experience?
mm. I tried, and still in my current role, try to lean into building relational trust. And because I think that is just so foundational to persuading people of anything, and it's a thing that I got better at over my career. I should acknowledge that, like, at the start of my career in kind of like policy leadership roles, I thought, like, if I came in with a mountain of facts, data points, graphs,
Mhm.
studies, like, that would always win the day. But actually, what often is most meaningful is when you build relationships with people, when you share stories, when you share your own experience so that people understand the values that underlie the argument that you're making. That is, I think, a very important part of leadership. I'll give you an example in the administration of something that I talk about in the book as one of the things I'm very proud of from our time. The president asked me to work on My Brother's Keeper, which was an initiative focused on boys and young men of color, and trying to address just the huge disparities we see in outcomes for boys and young men of color. And through that work, we identified that we really wanted to uh, undo the ban on access to Pell Grants for incarcerated students. That was part of the '94 crime bill. And it's terrible policy. Like, the data are very clear. If you're incarcerated and you get educational programming, you are significantly less likely to return to prison, obviously.
We don't want to rehabilitate. We want you to stay and just be miserable. And it's sort of mean. I don't know, that's my.
Yes, 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 yes. We make it, especially in the mid '90s, there was this just attitude of, like, we're going to be tough. We're going to make people as miserable as possible, and we're going to punish. And uh, it's short sighted, because 95% of the people who are incarcerated are coming home. And so we all have a stake in them coming home better prepared to be successful on the outside.
Mhm.
So we wanted to reverse this ban. We couldn't persuade Congress. So we created this pilot program called Second Chance Pell, where we had 65 colleges and universities in a sort of an experimental program, demonstration program, where they could use Pell Grants for incarcerated students. And what I've seen over the years, and what ultimately helped persuade Congress, after the Obama administration ended, persuade Congress to undo that ban, was that the stories of the people who were transformed by education while in prison are so compelling. When you are sitting with those folks, when you are hearing their story, it is almost impossible to reach any other conclusion than, gosh, we should try to do more of this. And for me, working on that issue, both while I was secretary and then after when I was running a civil rights organization, was incredibly satisfying because I could see in so many of the folks I met who had been incarcerated there, but for the grace of God. Like, it was split second decisions. It was not having a Mr. Osterwald in their life, not having a Misty, not having people to get them back on track when they got in trouble, like when I got kicked out of high school and folks got me back on track, right? They didn't have that. So there they are incarcerated. And then finally, here's a moment where they build an incredible relationship with a professor and they fall in love with philosophy or with sociology, and they're focused on their education, and it's life changing for them. And uh, what we found is even the people who are initially resistant, as they got to meet the the people who are the beneficiaries of the program, as they got proximate to them, they actually were persuaded. And Congress ultimately, in a bipartisan way, reversed that ban. Signed by President Trump. And there, and I'm, the Venn diagram of things, of bipartisan agreement is very, very, very small.
I think we just found it. I think that's.
But yeah, but amazing that we were
Yeah.
that was achievable, but it was achievable through, in part, the storytelling, the human connection.
It's not that long ago. It's still hopeful. It is a ray. It's like a little crack in the door, I feel like. And a
Yes,
lot of the same people
yes.
are still there.
Along those same lines, I was going to say one of the things that was so moving, and I talk about this in the book, is getting folks to come to the graduations, because you hear from the students how they're transformed, but more than that, you see it in the faces of their parents and their significant others and their kids who are at those graduations, and their whole way of seeing their family member is transformed as well. So much pride.
You can leave home, go to prison, feeling a lot of shame, and it can give you the chance to think about it, do something about it, and come back with self-efficacy and pride and just a new relationship where you can be helpful in another way, where you don't have to do something that employs skills outside of that. So it was moving to hear and to think about the self-esteem change that
Yes.
happens, because it's not like there aren't just like bad people and that like a baby is bad and all. It's like you may start to think of a certain way about yourself. And if you can think differently through education and through those accomplishments, I think we all, those of us who've gotten through school, I would say that's probably one of the best
Hmm.
possible outcomes, is that you feel like, I can do this. I can do something that's really difficult.
That's
And
exactly right.
you see who supports you. Well, you know, John, I want to thank you because you took the example that certain teachers gave you, and I'm sure didn't take the example from others. And the ones that helped you the most, you emulated them and you became that person. It blows my mind to think of someone in the White House at the top level of anything, but with your story and having done the real work, been a teacher in the classroom, started charter organizations, ran other organizations at a very less glamorous level, but just the grit that you showed and the persistence, the sort of the long obedience in the same direction is what I kept thinking of. He's just sticking to what he knows is right and calmly, very intelligently walking people through it and stand in almost not down to them, but by their side, eating with them, hanging out with them, living in the same community. These are all things that we all need to learn and can be reinvigorated by in education, the resilience. You model it all. And so it's just really something that gives me hope when you see someone exhibit servant leadership who doesn't necessarily have to. I think by the time you got through, 3 Ivy Leagues, you probably could have started looking down on people and you could have started talking down to people. And you won't do it today. And it's absolutely inspiring. So thank you. I'm from the bottom of my heart. It's you're someone that Jimmy Carter like person to me.
Oh my gosh, that's so kind. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for an amazing conversation.
Well, I loved it. I want to ask, people need to pre-order this book. If you're in education and you don't read this book, that's you're foregoing the feeling that the news gives you. This gives you the opposite of that. So if you can read this book, listen to the book. Is it on audio?
It is coming out on audio. Yes.
Okay. Well, get it, listen to it. When does it come out?
It comes out April 29th. Obviously it's available on Amazon, but, it's also available on independent booksellers too. That's important. I hope folks will also share it with other people in their lives, who might be future teachers, might be teachers who need that little spark of reason to keep going.
The J factor. They got to get
The
their
J
J factor back.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The joy factor. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. All right, John. Well, thank you so much. I can't wait for people to read it so I can talk to them about it too. And we'll be seeing you at our conference again, trying to have you back in San Diego in the fall.
I look forward to it. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. We'll talk soon.
Welcome back to Marlon Helps, or at least tries. I am super excited for the 2 questions that we have for today's episode. Marlon just finished talking to John B. King. It was an incredible conversation, so much fun, and excited that you all made it through the episode. Hopefully you feel the same. If you have any comments, if you want to engage with us, please do so on our Instagram at This Helps Podcast. If you have any questions you want Marlon to answer, feel free to send them our way there as well. I'm here with Marlon and producer Andrea.
First, I want to consider that producer Andrea has now taken on the full role and personality of a handheld mic, stand-up day show opening Type 5 stand-up comedian. So, Andrea, welcome, and I hope this launches your career to new heights.
Thank you so much. I'm so stressed about holding this microphone, so I'm glad that we can talk about it and just kind of get it out in the open.
That's how we do it here. We call out anything that we don't like so that we can share the burden,
If it's mentionable, it's manageable.
Avoiding, if you will.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Name it to tame it.
Without further ado, let's jump into the first question.
Can't wait to try.
So this first one, you asked John something similar, and I'd love for your take on it. What would you like any teachers listening to take with them into their days and ultimately into the classroom?
Themselves. I want them to take their full self. And if their full self is like blowing it or having problems or a wild alcoholic, like get in there and fix it. You're worth it. Take care of yourself. Those kids don't need another, textbook bit of information. Even a curriculum isn't going to do much if you're not taking care of your own mental health, if you don't prioritize relationships and get your own needs met, seriously, just take a look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Your job is too important to ignore yourself. And sometimes, like with any job, you get used to it. You start to ignore self-care or your relationships, and that becomes easy. I understand replacing efficiency with relationships, and it sometimes feels easier. But teachers that make a difference do so by being people we want to be like. So everybody struggles, and I'm not trying to call out people with addictions. Everybody almost has some kind of thing that they do that helps them deal with the challenges of life. But if you're doing it too much, you're not there for your kids or anyone else. Fix it. Don't wait for someone to call you in. Even if you're a good teacher, and sometimes we can get addicted to being the best teacher, and that takes all of our energy, and you're no longer relatable at that point. Be relatable. Take your full self into the classroom as much as you can, as much as that it's appropriate. And that doesn't mean, every once in a while hear of a teacher with some kind of extreme self-disclosure to their class of sophomores about their personal life. That's not what I'm talking about, because that's not relevant either, probably. But find out who your kids are, what they like, what they get excited about, and relate what you're teaching to them and to that, and relate to them and treat them with respect the same way you'd want to be treated. It's so easy to feel lonely and isolated. I just feel like I just dropped into a Jack Nicholson impression. It's so easy to feel lonely and isolated when you're a teacher. I feel like that's
Pretty good.
I mean, it was an accident, but
You've been working on that one?
Not
Oh.
really, no.
Wow.
I have a second question.
Okay, hit me.
This is a question for everyone. I think it will be fun to take a moment. A little walk down memory lane, if you will. When you think of a favorite teacher, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Greg Benzel.
Is there a story, a memory, a moment that you can share?
My favorite teacher of all time was Greg Benzel, but I never had him as a teacher. He was my football coach. And I would say, and another coach who I like and still talk to now, had a different style than Coach Benzel. His name was Mike Wells. So we're really naming and shaming on this show. And Mike Wells he played for the Niners in the 80s, kind of a man's man, if you will, but add the NFL to that. I once was in his office. He was the athletic director, and I was once in his office and saw a picture of Mike in a neon windbreaker and skin tight acid wash jeans with a bunch of other 49ers, so super buff. But I respect him, love him, and he was a great coach. But he, like most coaches, would get mad or, really, really, you would know. He might say a few things that he couldn't say now. But Greg, Coach Benzel, the guy was just for you. He would check on me, check on my grades, call me in, talk to me. He had a classic, and still does, as far as I know, buzz cut. Kind of like, if you kind of picture a nice, cool version of the PE teacher from Beavis and Butthead. And he was kind of a heartthrob too. I think the girls thought he was cute because he was younger at the time. And I just wanted to be like him. Man, he was so cool. It wouldn't matter if we were losing a game. He's real classy about it. Just he did a lot of sniffing, but not reacting, but yeah. And then he'd come into the the huddle and call a play and real meticulous, kind of like a Ringo Wright 38 blast, and then kind of just back up out of the circle. And probably the moment that changed my life was sophomore year. We were playing against Placer High School. It was a 2-point game, and we had gotten this, had this trick play where my friend Eric Stark would run out to the sidelines and act like he was getting taken out of the game, but really he was just in bounds. So he would talk to the coach. We were losing, and it was the last play of the game. And I was the center. And if you don't know about football, you have to get the ball from where it lies to the quarterback to make the play. But we also had another trick, which was this: instead of like a regular cadence, like downset hike or whatever, you call it first sound. So that right when the quarterback said down, I snapped the ball, and it goes to the quarterback, and they're sort of caught off guard. Eric runs up the sidelines, catches the ball, wins it. We win this hard-fought game. But I didn't do anything. I stayed completely still. Everyone went off sides. Everyone started the play but me, but I had the ball, and I lost the game for everyone because I did not hike the ball when I was supposed to.
I know nothing about football. How come?
Because when you're like, everyone else put the play in motion, but the quarterback didn't have the ball because I did.
Mm-hmm.
So all that time and planning, fairly easy win we could have had. Quick pass, Eric was open.
Did you freeze? Like, what do you think?
Was
what was
kind of
going on
muscle
internal?
memory. I was waiting for, we'd usually do like call out like 3 words before I would actually.
I see.
So first sound caught me off guard, even though it was my real most important job. And Greg Benzel, so classy. I was the last one off the field by myself. Nobody wants to be associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of walking off the field, still stunned by my mistake. And he just looked at me, sniffed, just looked at me, and then looked down and just said, dang, Morgan. He didn't even cuss. He didn't say damn. He didn't say what the F. Just dang.
Do you hear that whenever you make like a boneheaded, like, oh, I should have nailed whatever that thing was? Do you still hear him?
Yeah, I see him.
Mm-hmm.
Just me and him, eye contact through my face mask. And then he just did like 2 dangs, 2 sniffs, 2 dangs, and walked in the locker room.
It's brutal. I was thinking while you were telling that story that I don't really have any like favorite teacher stories until I got to college. And as a non-traditional student, I was like pretty close in age to a lot of my teachers, so it was different for me. And so on the one hand, it's like I kind of mourn that a little bit, but on the other, like
you're a non-trad student?
Yeah, and like not having teachers, I can't think of any in high school. I didn't have like bad teachers. I didn't have a favorite one, but then that also meant I didn't have anybody that I could disappoint on the football field. So it kind of evens out, you know?
But so who was your favorite teacher in college? Who was your favorite colleague/teacher? Because you were so old.
The first one who really, I went to community college first for a long time, and the first like teacher there who felt like they were taking their job seriously. I loved community college. I have nothing but good things to say about it. I'm glad I did it. I think it gets a bad rap, and it shouldn't. Was a professor named Keith O'Shaughnessy, who I'm still sort of in touch with, and he just, again, it was good to see somebody taking it seriously there. And then in undergrad, I had 2 really great English professors who sort of like taught me how to be a professional in that field, and I didn't know that was something I could do. Hannah, who was your favorite teacher?
Well,
Sigh? Cy Young Award.
The big sigh. I was just thinking, like, hearing you say that you didn't really have a favorite teacher. I feel lucky because I feel like I've had so many. There's one person who I think will forever stand out to me, but I could go through every stage of school and tell you, like, who stood out to me along the journey. Um, but every time I talk about him, I get emotional. So, fun fact about me is my freshman and sophomore years of high school, I was in ROTC, junior ROTC, and Andrew
Cool.
being so
I love
surprised.
to learn this. This is Hannah lore for me on the podcast.
Good.
And yeah, and one of my teachers there, Master Sergeant Brick,
Wait, is his last name Rick or Brick?
Brick.
Brick.
BRICKE.
That's so good.
Brick.
Cool. Nobody's going to beat that.
No, Master Sergeant Brick. Shoot.
Yeah. Everyone just called him Master Sergeant, but I just feel like I owe so much to him. He just saw so much potential in me in a time in my life where I saw none for myself. It was my freshman year of high school. That stands out to me the most. I knew him my freshman and sophomore years, and there were a few moments where I was not doing great, and there was one day I was in the counseling office and I just didn't want to be at school, and my mom actually had reached out to him because she was worried about me and didn't know who else to reach out to. And she reached out to him, and he came to the counseling office. He gave me a lollipop. And we just sat there and we just talked. And it was just like the first, I feel like, Marlon, as you say, human moment that I had with where, I'm a teenager and in a weird spot, and he was just talking to me like a normal person and not as a student, as someone that he's in charge of, just as someone who's going through life. And that was, that I feel like I'll never forget that moment of him coming in and giving me a lollipop and being like, "Here, take this lollipop." It was so good.
But it meant so much more. I think it's
so
just
much.
his presence being there, right?
Yeah. And ROTC, it's such a funny thing because I look back now and it's like, it's so different from, I feel like, who I am at my core. But that whole experience of being in it, like, truly changed my life. I ended up getting an award, and it's like one of those things where it's like, again, I didn't see myself as being much of anything, and all these people around me did.
But you were part of a community, it sounds like.
Yeah. But I just attribute so much of it to him and his, like, what he saw in me.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
Does he know? Does he know what a difference he made in your life?
I think so. But one thing I definitely have thought about and want to do is, like, have lunch with him as an adult. And yeah.
I'd probably love that. I think that's more inspirational than anything I said. We should, Hannah helps. But Marlon tried.
I love, that's something I'll never do, but love the idea of, is you should reach out to, I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I love the idea of you reaching out to him now. And yeah, I bet that would mean a lot, like Marlon said.
There's some other people that I feel like I think about all my teachers. They'll just come up at random times. But junior year of high school, chemistry teacher, so good. Like, one of the best teachers, Mr. Keefe.
Keefe in the house?
Keefe, yeah.
How is that spelled? Is it
Kiffe?
All right, I think we could go Keefe. But
Keefe.
all right.
But he was just, like, on top of being an incredible teacher, like, he had the passion and also taught human lessons among the actual chemistry. Something he would always say every single day. He probably still says it to this day. My sister also had him. She's 4 years older than I am. And even when she had him, he said the same thing. We're like, literally the bell rings, we're leaving class, and he would always say, keep your integrity meter full.
Oh,
And
love that.
yeah, and he would like teach lessons about, like, he'd tell just like small stories about integrity and how sometimes in life you're going to have to choose between integrity, money, and time. And they were, like really deep lessons.
This is good stuff.
Yeah. But I have moments still to this day where I think, like, whenever I hear someone talk about integrity, Mr. Keefe comes in my head, because he's the one who like really got it ingrained in my brain, really. And I appreciated that. So yeah.
Reach out to your favorite teachers.
Yeah. Is that something they should do? We need some
so.
practical
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah. I love I don't want to tell anybody what they should do, but I like the idea of people reaching out to their good teachers and thanking them for being good teachers.
I agree.
What about, should you reach out to bad ones? Unhelpful ones?
No,
Are you sure? Hannah, are you sure you shouldn't?
I'm sure.
And just say,
You did not help me.
yeah.
You know
This
what I
did not
think?
help.
I think you should just get a postcard of your middle finger and just send it. Just send it. Put your name on there. You don't need to put in a return address. Just say, remember me, and then that. And
That's our
they understand.
first March is going to be the This Helps middle finger postcard you can send to bad teachers.
Yeah. Well, my wife's a teacher. I was a teacher and a school counselor and loved every minute of it. And there are all kinds, some of the best people I know are teachers. And so thank you to all of them out there. I think we just talked to one that may be the best teacher of all in the world. But shout out John B. King Jr. And teachers have an incredible amount of power and influence in our lives. And especially at a time when we're learning about what to think about life and what life is going to be and what it can be, the possibilities and the setbacks and the challenges. So, just an encouragement to all the educators, keep doing it, keep showing up, keep being a trusted individual. You may not have any idea. And for a lot of kids, just being a reliable, consistent, caring adult and being nice and kind is probably going to be enough to impact their life in a way that is positive. So be energized. I don't think there's a more important job than ushering in the understanding of the world for kids. Thanks for joining us today. We hope it helped. Stay connected with us at thishelpspodcast.com.